Computer, and Alexander.
Yeah. Well,
Take
welcome
it away.
everybody. Really happy to be back with all of you and all of the folks that have been tuning in. And so we're back for another emergent dialogue, and I'd like to just start by just bringing in a little context around why we're here doing this. Um, the idea is that human beings have this fantastic gift of language and the ability to allow our hearts to give birth to worlds together. And one of the ways that we do that is through language. And through the centuries, we've explored different ways, different patterns of relationship, different ways of becoming with one another and discovering who we are together. And in every era, there's different practices that we explore, and each each set of practices, it gives rise to a different kind of relationship, a different kind of relating. And that, of course, then gives birth to a different kind of world. And what we're doing here is we're trying to discover new ways we might have conversation, to see what new worlds might come into being as we're living in this era where still it appears that there's an considerable amount of suffering, confusion, and all of us that are trying to engage in some kind of medical tradition or helping tradition. We want to help those that are suffering, and we want to help ourselves, and so that we can find our way here. We can find our way into a deeper dimension of our being and what's possible. And so what we're attempting to do is, instead of have conversations about what we already know, which is really common in Chinese medicine. And it's also beautiful. There's a lot of beauty in sharing knowledge. But what we're trying to do here is model a different way of discovery, where all of the history of our shared learnings, it's sitting somewhere in the field, but we're trying to foreground the unknown and foreground a presence of being between us, in hopes that if we lean into that as the primary, we might feel an impulse, a creative impulse. And that creative impulse might take us somewhere we've never been before. And so that's what we're wanting to do, and we're wanting to do with all of our listeners too. And so that's the invitation. And with that, Lonnie, take it away.
So we've been in these discussions we've been doing, which have been about every 4 to 6 weeks now for a year and a half. We've chosen a topic relevant to healing and our development of healers, the therapeutic relationship, the essential nature of medicine. And the topic we're going to choose tonight, that we've chosen for tonight, is trust. And it struck me very early on in my clinical career that almost universally people had felt betrayed, brokenhearted in some way. And it was front and center for most people to learn how to trust again. And what I noticed, what I did as an experiment after a while, because this issue of trust was so pervasive, was I asked a few patients, I started asking people, I want you to contemplate between now and the next treatment what it would take for you to trust and really look into it. And a couple of people actually came back and I said, well, did you contemplate that? And they said yes. And I said, well, what did you come up with? And the first woman, and another patient did this too, she burst into laughter and she said, well, essentially, everyone would have to do exactly what I tell them all the time. And it was interesting because that was the intuition I had when I asked these people to contemplate. And fairly early stage of shadow resolution is learning what our triggers are. And when people become aware of their triggers, they generally respond by trying to control everything around them. To create safe place, could you speak to me just this way? Do you have the key for my own special lock? You're sitting a little too close. Could you put it in a way that I could hear it? So people are trying to learn to trust by controlling others. And what I came to in my own life, in the face of my life experience, and what I discovered in the treatment room with patients is the way we learn to trust again is by becoming trustworthy. Because we're never going to trust anybody more than we trust our own selves. And what does it really take to become trustworthy? It's an interesting contemplation to and what is it that we're trusting in? And often when people talk about trust and needing to trust, and what the way they're thinking about it is, I just have to trust that everything's going to be okay. And anybody who's been in clinical practice or lived a certain number of decades comes to understand as we grow up that everything isn't necessarily going to be okay. That very difficult things and very painful things happen. Terrible things happen to good people for no apparent reason. And some very bad people seem to live forever. And sometimes really, really difficult things happen. And, I think as we grow up, we realize, I've realized at least I can't trust that things are going to be okay. What I can trust in over time, over a time of cultivation and having some degree of victory in the face of my own resistance to wholeness is I can trust in myself that whatever comes, I'm going to strive to be the catalyst for the emergence of the true, the good, the beautiful in the face of it. That I'm going to respond in the right way. And I can come to trust in that. And I can come to trust in the overall positivity of the process, the wholesomeness of the direction of development, and in the inherent goodness in the creative impulse, even though at times it just extraordinarily painful. What is extraordinarily painful, but I can trust in my capacity to bear what is and to hold it, and that the real medicine is responding to what is as it is from the highest, deepest, and best impulse within myself, and trust that I'm giving it everything I can, and that's what I can do, which is very different from trusting in a specific outcome that this crisis will resolve itself in some way my ego would like to see, or in some way that's going to benefit me and make me feel good or be good for my bank account, or trust that this illness will get better in the way that I like. All I can really trust is whatever happens, that in the face of that, I'll strive to make the choice for the highest. So, so that's a background on trust. And I was questioning, like, these are the things I teach, and should I say, and they really represent sort of the edge of how I think about it. And should I just say that? And I thought it's probably better to say it because now I have nothing left on my mind to say about it, and which means it creates a possibility for really going somewhere. And hopefully some of what I've said will be a catalyst, and we'll see where we can go, somewhere new.
Yeah, so as you're speaking, Lonnie, what it initially brings up for me is the inquiry around the relationship between trust and um, letting go. Whatever it is that still thinks it's separate, what occurs, the process of that aspect of our being, letting go to something vaster. You know, when I hear you talking about trust and this desire to control, I experience in my life that there's a continual sort of dissolution of a doer. And as that occurs, there's a sense of trusting that what's occurring, what's arising is profoundly sacred, even if it's horrible from some perspective, but that there's this this necessity and arising of these sort of karmic blooms in our lives, these moments of pain and things that we're learning from. But there's something for me in trust around sort of a deepening in dissolution of, I guess, trying to control things. I guess that's what you already said, but it's not just there's not just the sense of me doing it. There's a recognition of being in the presence when there's any small self, the recognition of being in the presence of something that is only ever trustworthy. And there's sort of a giving over to that. Yeah.
As Lonnie was talking, I felt reminded of you mentioning, Lonnie, in your first book, Nourishing Destiny, talking about the Bai Hu Tong and how the five virtues are aligned with the five phase elements, and how trust and indeed, I completely resonate with that trustworthiness and integrity. Those are all three different possible translations, I think, for the word Xin, which is aligned with the concept of Earth and the center. And so it's almost the first lesson I find, like when I speak to students in the first class of Chinese medicine, is to always remind people how before we learn any techniques, we need to have this center, we need to have this trust. And coming back to Alexander, your beautiful remarks at the beginning, it's how it is uh, in general, not just this session, but every session here is about trying to develop a new relationship, a different way of interrelating with each other. And I think that I particularly like the topic of trust because it's the basis of all interrelating, because Earth, of course, in Chinese medicine is a container, right? Isn't there a acupuncture point that's, appear Chupin, that's
Broken bowl.
the broken bowl or the broken clay vessel, really, literally. And so I find as modern people, particularly as modern North Americans, we all earth deficient, and that's where that interrelation problem that Lonnie lined out so precisely, because this is definitely, as a teacher, in the treatment room, etc., we find over the last decades or so that way how people relate to each other is definitely changing, because somehow the earth element is becoming thinner, right? In Chinese medicine, we say the earth is thick, just like farmers in the Chinese countryside are called thick. There is a kind of reliability and ability to rely on something, and you can trust the word. And We are in the moment, as you know, in this never-ending project of renovating an old inn, and loans are involved and enormous amounts of paperwork. And just when you think you're done, you start again. Where is the where is the paperwork for this month? Because that's somehow how we replacing this ability to contain each other in this earthen vessel, that we are in this center vessel together, and I can feel your heart, and I trust that this is completely real. I don't need any kind of stamp. I don't need any kind of signature. Whereas in modern times, coming back to Lonnie's remark, everything is we have to have a prenup. We have to everything needs to be signed. And even though that, of course, also can be broken and undone with expensive lawyers, we just replacing an internal certainty with external certainty, and thinking that that is trustworthy, and thinking that external microscope science is trustworthy, rather than like I'm in another absurd situation right now coming back from China, and one of my best friends is got hit by a minibus and is completely paralyzed, and was sepsis, infection everywhere, holes in his stomach, and every night they say he's not going to make it through. Um, and then we said, can we do acupuncture in the ICU? Can we do Chinese herbs? And they said, no, that's unproven, proven and dangerous. And I said, what's worse than death? If you've already given up on the patient. And so we've started, they thought that there was a kind of logic behind that argument, and somehow some distant administrators gave the go ahead, and lo and behold, he was like coming back literally with necrotic tissue on his abdomen and ascites going down, and he's now out of the ICU and getting in rehab essentially. Still a long way to go, but there is just so much this 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 so for having my daughter in there who's been taking care of him really a lot of the time, it's the best lesson for her as a Chinese medicine student to see this lack of trust that we have everywhere in science and in medicine and in administrative procedures. In when the when everything in nature, earth is another word for nature. It's another word for the body. It's something that is solid, that is thick, that is reliable, and that has knowledge and wisdom in it. And it's interesting that from a modern perspective, right, we heard the word control multiple times. We think trust and control are opposite. When, like, right, was it Brezhnev or said trust is good, control is better? Sort of a motto for our era, but in Chinese language, the word xin is actually means sealed, signed, and delivered. It's proof. It's real. It's that's what's real. And so I've becoming more and more radical in that way, even though I'm not really a radical person when it comes to trying to open this container and kind of trusting this field of relating to somebody in this trust field more so than some kind of a signature or some kind of a scientific study or so. So those are my few thoughts that I'm having after you guys speaking.
I love the trusting the field. Like that has a sense of tangibility to me that earth things don't. That I can I can trust in the field in a different way. To me, this I see trust as somewhat nebulous and unknown, because if it's known, I don't have to rely on trust. I already know. There's a substantiality to it. So to me, trust implies an unknown, that there's something that I can't quite encapsulate, but I have to trust it. And so if it's a function, I think, it's funny because Heiner, you're speaking about the function of earth and the earthiness of trust. And I think about trust being a heart issue and, trusting in the infinite versus the finite. And then I also think about trusting in myself, where that kind of trust is like it's in my feet. It's like kidney one kind of trust, that I know who I am in the nature of things. And so I think about the things that are trustworthy. And when we're speaking about trusting that things will be okay, that implies a certain amount of judgment as to what okay is. And if I trust that things are going to be as they are, like that's pretty much trusting in the Tao, that things will be themselves, things will be as they are. And, if somebody is at the threshold of death, maybe trusting is that I trust that death will hold them in the way that death is meant to hold them, instead of trusting that, having faith that they won't die, hoping in a certain outcome that I think will be good. So it has a more open sense to me when we're speaking about it. And I think, Alexander, when you were speaking about trust, I felt it more as kind of a falling back, just a falling back and being held. I don't even know by what, but just this okayness in the midst of things that aren't okay. I can still trust. That's when I need to have trust. That can I still fall back and rely on the goodness of creation, the goodness of life itself, the goodness of my place between heaven and earth, which makes it all good. And I think that this trust has a sense of like authenticity to it, that has like a matured quality to it, where when I can really trust in the nature of things, when I can really trust in the depth of myself, I have already penetrated into some pretty dark areas so that I can go into a deeper place beyond duality, beyond good and bad, right and wrong, what a positive outcome might be. And so there's a depth dimension to it for me. But I love this topic because it's going in so many beautiful directions.
As you're speaking, Randine, um, what I'm hearing is this this very deep impulse to cry out when nourishment is needed. And what's that relationship between crying out and being met? I mean, to use maybe sort of, it feels like I want to use like like the Sufi kind of like the beloved, like when I'm in that depth of despair, and then there's that natural, unstoppable impulse to cry out. Then what's the what is the response? The call and the response, and you know what my sense of it is that over the years and years and years and years, as human beings have the, I don't know, the enough pain that crying out is the only option. And then if there is the willingness to listen for the response, because of course we can cry out and then close our ears. But if there's the ability to listen to the response, my sense is that there's a building of a relationship. Can I trust that if all the places that think that they are separate, if they're willing, like, is a discovery around, can the one take care of itself if I let go of my need to try to control some outcome? And for me, that's come through years and years of, not liking something. I mean, that's suffering, right? There's some degree of resistance. But then those moments when there's that glimmer of response, and then that glimmer of response turns into a celestial downpour. At some point, there's this development of an unshakable trust that there's only one thing happening, and all the doers can just open wide and drink deeply and be quenched. At which point, I guess you could say all is well, or you could say all is as it is. But it's also well because the downpour is ineffable.
Love the word celestial downpour. The I don't the if I remember correctly, in all of the Confucian classics or so, the human being is between heaven and earth, which means between the material world and the spirit world. And the earth element is a container, but container of what? It's a container of the of spirit of fire. And so, in a certain way, coming back to the what I felt moved to say at the beginning in response to you is this insistence that what's real is the material world only, and everything else is unreliable and you need is a woo-woo. And when really our mandate, at least how ancient people saw that, was to be a container for the spirit world. And without trust, you can't do that because that's the opening. Because as Randine was saying, you need to trust something that you cannot touch, that you feel is there. And the classics say is there, your teachers say it's there, you feel it's there, but science says it's woo-woo because of mired in this realm or so. So I think this is sort of our predicament in modern times, that we think the only trustworthy thing that we can rely on are these numbers and these signatures and these contracts. And everything else is actually not only unreliable, but irresponsible. And when to ancient people, it was always the same refrain I see in these texts I'm reading, how we cannot make that which is least important the most important, meaning we can't be seduced by the material world and think this is the only thing that is real. It's just an ornament on, it's just the tip of the iceberg of a much deeper type of reality. And so we have to trust, coming back to what you said, Randine, these what stirs in the heart in that container. And instead of thinking I'm hallucinating, it's that is something that is real and reliable and off the earth, and an intermediary, a real connection to the realm of the invisible, and therefore also real, the only way to create community, because community is not just with other people, but with this other realm, uh, rather than go on antidepressants or so, because we feel like there's no purpose, no meaning, because everything is just like a plastic bottle and it's not containing anything. It's just a empty kind of matter. Um, so I think all of those topics are related, and this is a great topic. I love it.
Yeah, I'm struck by the mental rational mind locating itself in time and space with all of these structures you're talking about, these contracts and these rules and these roles, and and needing a kind of a surety. It's really a false surety. And just this deeper sense I have of trust in, for so much of my early life, and probably the same for all of us as we're building a self, we're building an ego, we're trying to gain self-confidence in the world. And as a scholar, for myself, relying on my mind so much and seeing through that mind and that organizing framework, seeing through the ego, seeing through the content, all the shoulds and shouldn'ts and rules and roles of the superego, and developing more in later life to become a soul, and finding a wellspring of trust in becoming a soul, and just a deeper process predicated on a mystery, and knowing that not not only can't I figure everything out, but the essential things aren't really that tool that figures things out in this way isn't really oriented to the deeper truth of our journey in this world. And so I have found a much deeper trust in, obviously I still have a mind and an analytic mind and an intellect that I can use as a tool, but there's an ever deepening well of trust in just the connection to the fundamental process, and in listening very, very deeply out of a very, very deep care to what the unconscious can provide and can reveal, what the mystery itself can reveal, and learning to hear the mystery at the heart of all these going on in the world. And I think, the Chinese have all these cultivational methods, and certainly the I Ching, which, at some level can take quite a bit of scholarly and intellectual study, but it's a way of understanding implicit flows. And I just remember this moment early in my clinical practice where I sat behind a patient and I touched the patient. And I might have told this story in one of our other things. I touched a shoe point on her back to feel the chi where I was going to put a needle, and I felt her become nauseous. And I said to her, "You have a visceral repulsion to intimacy." And when I said that, I was just taken back. Like, who am I to say that? Where did those words come from? And I came in the next day and she had canceled her appointments. And I felt really bad about what I said. And like 7, 8 years later, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. And I went to her wedding, and on the reception line, I hadn't seen her in years. I said, "What am I doing here? Why'd you invite me?" She said, "I came for one acupuncture treatment. You touched my back and said you have a visceral repulsion to intimacy." And I remembered being sexually abused by my music teacher when I was a little girl. And I felt you could see through me, and I didn't feel safe to work with a man. So I went to a woman and practitioner, and I addressed it, and that's what allowed me to meet my husband and get married today. And that there's a listening for a voice inside of us that doesn't lie, that is ultimately trustworthy, that we can hear with the great humility and the deepest level of care for the soul and creation through the soul to reveal to us a way forward, even in the midst of the most difficult times. And having learned that in my practice, which was like 35 years or so ago, I always endeavored to cultivate listening to that voice that was ultimately trustworthy and cultivating a trust in the positivity of the process, not just for myself as a practitioner, but in the ultimate positivity of whatever the patient had to confront in any given moment, no matter how difficult it was for them and painful. Because some things, some diseases aren't going to get better. Some bodies aren't going to make it. But the process can always be held in a deep love and in a deep trust of the positivity of a direction that things are taking far beyond just this life and this incarnation.
So I've been taking in, feels like there's so many pieces floating around the space. There's the earth piece about this matter. Can we trust, as you said, Heiner, can we trust beyond pieces of paper? Can we trust what we know in our hearts? Even if, as you've said, Lonny, we've been betrayed, can we still say it's more important that I live in this trust place? I think I'm listening and I'm feeling the expansion of the topic, and I'm kind of going around the wheel and saying, yes, there's a fire, heart, trust, betrayal. There's this earth piece about this thickness, this sense of I can stand here, no gravity is beneath me, I have a body here. But then there's the metal piece that says, yes, I have a body now. Yes, we've made these agreements now, but as you said, Randine, there's also that this will dissolve, and can I trust that dissolution? And then there's this issue of the will that responds to this prospect of dissolution by saying, I don't want it that way. I want it to be this other way in the water. And then we learn that even that has to be given over to a larger way or a larger wisdom. And I think even the sprouting forth of the wood has an element of trust. So I've been sitting here and going around that cycle as we've been talking, and I've been listening and realizing how that cycle ever since I discovered it, that symbol of the circle and the pentacle within it has been what I have leaned back into for well over 40 years. And I believe in watching my grandchildren grow, that even if they don't know anything about Chinese medicine, that cycle, to trust in that. I was speaking to Diana, my granddaughter, the other day, and I was saying, yes, we're looking out the window. And I said, well, we're getting ready for winter and you can see the plants are dying back. And she said, yes, but now it's autumn. And she's 5. But to say, and now it's autumn, to trust that autumn is now and that we can rely on it coming again. And I think what is very alive for me in our conversation and very alive for me is that even this cycle, that is the foundation of my trust. I put bluebird boxes out and I trust that in the spring they'll come back. Oh, we had monarch butterflies hatching, and to trust that next year the milkweed will return. But what I'm aware of in my own being is that even these cycles that human beings have trusted for how long? We don't even, millennia, that we're disrupting those cycles, that we are interfering. Some of our monarchs didn't hatch till just like 5 days ago. It was off. And I'm like, they still hatched, they still trusted, but where are they going to go? There's no flowers there for them to nourish themselves. So within this and within this sort of fundamental, what is for me a kind of fundamental dissolution of some of even the values that I thought we all could agree on, like decency and a kind of respect in the political domain, are no longer trustable. What I'm sitting with is, what then do we trust? And I think what this is pushing forward in me is that, for a long, long, long time, I've been telling my students and I've been speaking to in the medicine that I'm practicing, and it's all about this idea that some new way of organizing reality, some new consciousness is erupting. And I have said again and again, consciousness has an intelligence that we can trust. Despite all appearances to the contrary, human consciousness is up to something. Like, that's been my mantra. Like, I like getting up in the morning a lot better if I believe that human consciousness is really up to something than that I think we're just on a big downhill entropic road to decomposition. So I would say, in a crisis of trust. And I was so glad that we were meeting tonight, because I felt like, and I think what's coming to me is what people have been saying, like what you said, Heiner. It's to remember that we're not just these outer earth containers, we're also the fire inside the container. And like what you said, Randine, that you trust the field maybe more even than the earth right now. But this is a shift in how we are actually orienting ourselves that the trust is now in a field dynamic or some other level of communication or what we're touching or what we're treating. And we somehow need to keep calling each other back to that because we can't remember, or I myself can't remember it alone. Like I need you and I need others who are tuning into this other frequency to say, yes, this frequency has us. Despite the fact that the whole earth seems to be in a turmoil. It's and that's the okayness of it, and the not okayness of it.
Well, I think so I think that beautifully puts it. It puts the question, so is this all for us? And are we, Ellen Marie Chen, who wrote a beautiful translation of the Tao Te Ching, t talks about wood in relationship to the character Shin, which is earth, that Heiner mentioned can be integrity or trust. And wood fulfills heaven's promise of new beginnings, which she defines as a substantial basis of trust, and talks about that in relationship to the character for virtue. And the question, and so we can look at these cycles, and yes, we can, I trust that, spring will come again, but maybe not. Maybe it all comes apart. And then the question is, which I believe I've seen through that, we're just agent. It's when you say human consciousness is up to something, I think it's bigger than human consciousness, that we phase a small part of it, and there's just a sense I have that I can trust that I can give everything toward a positive outcome. What will be, but there's an ultimate trust in the positivity, even if the fabric of life comes apart on this earth. That there is something in the cultivation of virtue which is eternal and serves the evolution of consciousness, even if the outcome that we'd all like to see isn't there for us, because it ultimately isn't about us. What's it about? It's about consciousness waking up to itself. And all I can do is give everything to that. And I can intuit, I can just intuit in the heart the ultimate goodness of that and the bigness of it and the vastness of it beyond any comprehension my mind could have or ever hope to orient itself to in a material world in a way that provides security for my body or my ego.
Yeah, I think this is where I love where this is going. But this trust in human consciousness that you were speaking about, Lori, and then Lonnie, the trust in consciousness itself. That I think this is where these are not two things. That we're moving into the place where human consciousness is the big consciousness, and that's when the fabric of reality as we have known it is fraying apart, and that we're not able to trust in these finite things that we've been able to rely on for millennia, for forever. And I think of my, I have a lot of dear, dear friends in Asheville who were not at all expecting a hurricane in the mountains, um, and the devastation there and losing their homes. Like the entire area was without water, without power, without cell phones, with a lot of people in the mountains. Their roads just were destroyed. Women having babies out and by themselves, um, and a dear friend of mine, he and his wife lost their house. They have absolutely nothing. And so they've been staying, at other people's houses and just relying on the goodness of others. And I talked to him last week, um, and having nothing and having lost everything, his consciousness and focus is on the immediacy of this moment and gratitude for being able to have a place to stay today and that I had some water today. And even though I don't have any clothes, and even though we don't have a house, and we have no past and we have no future, but we have something beautiful. And that's everybody coming together and sharing. And so out of this devastation, there's the arising of people coming together that, before there was any help that arrived, they were, sending donkeys up to um, bring supplies to people, just like the locals. So I think of that in these weather patterns and the seasons that are changing, that maybe we can trust on that goodness of humanity because things are falling apart, not because they're not. Because now we have to trust in the unknown. We have to, it takes that crisis, like Alexander was saying, to call out for help. And the call out for help is calling out for something in here that I didn't know that I had. I thought it was out there, but it's in here. And that's the place where consciousness, big C, big self, is small self. It's me showing up when I don't know how to show up. And there's something that I can trust in that comes out of that, but I don't know what it is. And that's why it has to be trusted, because I don't know what it is. And that's the mystery, the goodness of the mystery.
And for me, what you were just talking about, Randine, and what you was said earlier, Lonnie, uh, is triggering another thing that's dear to my heart, and is, since we were talking about the relationship of the different elements, and with that, the different virtues, what is the earth virtue that generates trust, generated by self itself? Fire generating earth. Earth contains fire, and the fire virtue is Li, which is politeness, which means ritual. But really, in essence, it's exactly what you were both talking about, which is this ability to contain whatever the universe prepares for me without lamenting about it because it's not pleasing to my ego, but going like trusting that there is a deeper purpose, trusting that afterwards, whether it was my cancer 35 years ago, or my friend being paralyzed in the ICU, or your friends being homeless in North Carolina, that there is some deeper purpose that's vaster and in the end more meaningful than what my ego wants right now. And that, so those two things, the deep politeness and a ritual relationship to the universe and the kind of consciousness and intelligence that lives in it, and a surrendering into a sense of that everything on some level, as purposeless and nonsensical might seem and ridiculous even, um, that on some bigger scheme there's always a purpose and there's always goodness that comes from that. And so these Li and Xin, fire and earth, the deep ritual politeness and being with ourselves and others in the universe, and intelligence and purpose therein and trust itself, they all hang together. And maybe that's really what integrity is. And that's where trustworthiness comes from if I can live like that.
Kind of remind me before you were talking about the character for trust. And you said something about like it's already sent or sealed, or what did you say?
Yes, Shin is not just trust, but it means letter and it means seal, like something that you stamp, or it's like two different pieces. Like when you send an emissary, you give them a one piece, and when you get there, that person trusts you because you put
Yeah.
these two pieces together. So, yeah.
This reminds me of the character for Ming and how there's this, this voice from origin that has stamped us. But it's not like, I mean, we can imagine it like a stamp, like a hand makes a seal, but we can also experience it like that 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 hand, so to speak, from origin, it never lifted its hand away. It's a seal that is enduring. It's a stamp that's enduring. It's a signature of origin that has that's within us that doesn't undo. It doesn't go away. It can't be pulled apart. And there's that sense of looking inward deeply enough until that is known. And then there's only one thing happening. There's only one thing happening. There's only one thing crying out. There's only one thing nourishing itself, responding to the crying out. And there's sort of this sense of, fulfilling one's destiny or fulfilling the deeper impulse of this one movement. That there's no way to get away from it. There's no way to unpeel that stamp. I mean, we can be mired in delusion, and most of us are, at least some percentage of the time. So it feels like there's been a severing and we're sort of falling into ignorance or purgatory or, however we language it. But that there's only one thing that descends into the darkness and there's only one thing that rises out of it. And me, there's just something, you mentioned that, Heiner, and then something Lonnie said a little while ago somehow just reminded me or brought into the conversation. It's like it's all one signature, all one stamp. I guess when I have a sense of contact with that, there's nothing left but trust. And if I can keep in like a sliver of memory of that on like the worst day possible, then there's still a deep resounding trust that that moment of darkness it's there to uncurl, it's there to fulfill its own destiny, it's there to fulfill its potential.
And that place, in a certain way, is the only place where we can truly feel at home. Like the another word related to earth is Li, right? As in Susan Li's stomach 36, the earth point on the earthiest channel that there is. And there is also, right, the corresponding Li points on the large intestine channel, right around the elbow before and after, just like the stomach 36 points is right around the knee, which is always this connection between the heaven part of the limb and the earth part of the limb. It's this symbol for connecting heaven and earth, connecting fire and in matter and non-matter. And this just, without that, this world where nothing can be done without a lawyer. Nothing can be done without these contracts. Nothing can be done without scientific proof. This is not where we are home. That is a world where, unless we sedate ourselves with something, we just don't want to live there. And this kind of idea that the ego can control the world and make the world pleasing in every way and we get to decide is not a place where I mean, that's what we see every day, not just in ourselves, but in our patients who are constantly frustrated and ill, etc., because they constantly up with their nose against that. I can't control that, and there's constantly something happen I don't like, and that's traumatizing me, and whereas a place where we are at peace or trust that there is always, no matter what happens, a deeper purpose that is much bigger than just my own existence, uh, then all of a sudden we can settle into a place that is home. And perhaps as a result of it, also then appear more trustworthy to other people, including our patients.
Mm. I think that is very relevant for me, Heiner, the question of, in the midst of this particular time where we're saying we're not sure, but there is a specter of an unraveling, of some kind of unraveling, whether it's of the cycles of nature as we know it, the ecosystem as we know it, or the collective agreed upon basic values of relatedness. And how do we stand steady for ourselves, but also as clinicians in the midst of that, what I'm going to call unraveling of the expected or relied upon. And what keeps coming back to me is this line at the very beginning of Ever Present Origin, where Gebser says, and this was, of course, written, I think, in the late 40s after Hiroshima and after Nagasaki. And he wrote in the preface, he said, either human beings are going to make this leap out of the dualistic, warlike consciousness of the mental, of this opposite, or, as you're saying, the endless rationalization of paperwork or proving the truth on a material level. He said either people will make the leap into a different dimension of being where we feel our interconnectedness, where we understand that ultimately we are in an interconnected field, or, and he uses the words, or we will atomize, which I've thought a lot about, because of course the atomic bomb is an atomization of matter. And we have the capacity to do that. We could atomize ourselves in that very real, very concrete way. But I also think about it as, when I sit with it, and I sit with it in this conversation, as an atomization where I become aware of myself as a kind of atomized field of awareness, a field that I'm not just this body, just I'm also a field of awareness that is in dynamic connection to all of you, to all of life. And as you said, Lonnie, from there I can see that it's not so much human consciousness that is shifting, but rather that we understand ourselves as this vibratory capacity to transmit and to decide to make a choice to live into that awareness level. And at that awareness level, for me, that's where the trust is, because it really puts me in that river of life that is so much bigger, that this is for me, but rather I am for this. I am here for this. And it affirms for me that I can dedicate myself to that no matter what the actual historic chronological outcome is in the moment. And to be in the treatment room, to be with my patients with that as a background, feels like the only way to uh, navigate the intense and transformational energies that we are actually inhabiting, swimming in.
It it seems, as you're talking, Laurie, it seems like trust establishes a relationship to this very deep mystery, which as it opens and to each of us and between us is imbued with trust and creates a deeper trust and creates my experience of it is in that trustworthiness, there's a doubtlessness, and cynicism is totally destroyed, absolutely destroyed. And there is a sense of just no inherent limitation and a profound interest. One of the ways I like to translate the character Shen, practically speaking, is as interest. That Shen is just interest. Consciousness is just interested in itself. It's interested, the Shen, that fire, that yang in the infinite ocean of the unconscious, is just interested in catalyzing the emergence and learning and seeing and witnessing and playing with and participating in the whole thing. And then the discussion, the whole context becomes so much bigger than trusting that things will be okay with me, or you'll fulfill your end of the contract, or things will work out and humanity will persevere at this point in history and culture will. It's just the process is just so big, and there's a doubtlessness about the positivity, and trust just seems to open up to it. And then to be cultivated by it, to be imbued with this profound trust, which is a kind of reciprocity with the mystery. And as probably we all know, Heiner knows that in the Bai Hu Dong, the earth element is the only element that got two virtues. And one of them is integrity, but the other is shu, reciprocity. And I can just see the relationship of integrity to establishing a reciprocity between myself as a body and a mind here now, sitting in a chair having this conversation as part of a species on a planet in a world with rules and roles, and having reciprocity to this unfolding mystery at the heart of everything, which is pouring itself out through these structures, but completely transcends them and transforms them as it moves through and enlivens them and manifests them.
I love how you came around to that uh, idea of reciprocity. It reminds me, Heiner, of what you said about the messenger coming with a piece of the message that fits in to the person you're delivering to. So we, in that way, create trust. And I feel it so much in this, the nature of the conversation that we have, that there's a kind of, in the field of the conversation, there's a reciprocity, there's a flowing reciprocity of how we almost become one mind in this exploration through fitting the pieces of our minds into this puzzle. And then something definitely different, although still connected to us, emerges out of that. A kind of prayerful space. And I really, as I said to Lonnie when we came on, I'm so grateful that we had this meeting tonight and that we had this topic, because I feel it all up and down my bladder meridian. I'm like leaning back. I'm like, okay, see you in a month. And we'll see whether the fabric of life is still raveled. What are we going to talk about next time?
Well, when I think of reciprocity in it feels more uh, complex than like the simple kind of I give you something and you give me something. But I think more of like interdependency, and that's what I hear when I think of Earth. One of the things that, comes up, and as we've been speaking, is this notion of interdependency, that like we're interwoven with one another. It's we can't come undone. I mean, things can come undone, but we can't come undone from each other. You're muted, Randy.
Yeah.
Thank you. My dog's snoring in the background, so but it's like this signature that we're creating together in this field. And you can feel that. Like I can't call it my signature, I can't call it Heiner's signature, but there is this signature in us being together that is the combined signature of all of us. And it has something that feels so trustworthy. Like I said, trusting in the field, but this is trusting in something very specific and relational. And that has a buoyant quality to it. And it's still stable. It has all of those elements. It's not me. It's not me. It's not just the big consciousness. It includes human consciousness, and it includes all of us in this unitive collective space. And the feeling of that, how it expands the heart and almost brings tears to my eyes because it opens up in every dimension. It makes me feel more rooted in me somehow, because I know that the idea of I have of myself is not who I am. It feels like this relational dynamic is so much more true and encapsulates the reason for being so much more than my little purpose that I define only by myself. And I think that that's the call of something, that that's the call for where we must go. It's not even, it doesn't feel like a choice. When I'm in small self, it feels like a choice, but when I'm here with you, it feels like a necessity. It feels like just, yes, this is where humanity is going. It has to.
Well, we're seeing the future.
And I'm really seeing through the conversation, but it's becoming more apparent to me that the dissolution, the sense of fragmenting of what has seemed to be institutionalized or reliable, the sort of coming apart of structures that we're seeing on almost every level from this place on the very, very big scale. I can see, and this is something I hate to admit. It's kind of like, I'm kicking and screaming against admitting the necessity of this sense of dissolution, because of course it is at the same time creating an imperative to begin to relate to ourselves and to the world and to the cosmos differently, not just theoretically, but how do I trust? How do I trust now? And it really does feel like what we trust is this heart field that is between us and also within us, and in every needle and every drop of medicine that we are infusing it with that kind of presence, to this level of connection, to this level of I would say the fire that is contained within each of us.
I think too about what Lonny said at the beginning about betrayal when there isn't trust.
Yeah.
And I think of the question, how do you trust when you don't trust?
Yeah.
That calls out like, now I don't have the option of not trusting, but I can still honor the sense of betrayal and the sense of not trusting. But how do I trust in the midst of not trusting? But it makes trust win.
That feels like it so gets at it, Randine. And I'm really glad that you circled back around to that initial piece that you brought forward, Lonny, how many souls that we encounter in the treatment room come in with that wounded capacity to trust. And that, one piece of treatment, at least for me, has been this healing of that through a reliable therapeutic container, through the reliability that I can keep showing up no matter what the person brings in. And healing those levels of betrayal through the triple heater deep into the pericardium, going all the way into the heart. And actually through that reliability of presence, inviting our patients to heal in that place. But I think what you're saying here, Randine, is even more to the point. What if there isn't that figure, that earth, that cycle that's going to say, yes, spring's coming back. Yes, the daffodils will grow. Yes, I'll be here when you need your next appointment. Yes, the needles will be here. As you said, we need to be able to trust even when a hurricane comes in the mountains, and our entire lives are atomized. And this point that you're making, to trust beyond, um, how did you put it, when to trust even when trust is not reliable.
And
that
I
that
bring
feels
it back.
like the big invitation. Yeah,
I think about death in that regard too.
that's perfect.
It's how can I enter that and face that with total trust? And I can't trust death because I don't remember it. And I'm going full on in the mystery with that one.
Yeah.
And so how can I bring this sense of trust that we're learning to cultivate into the big unknown where trust needs to be? Then I can ride into that with something else other than human reliance or pharmaceutical reliance or keep me out of it. But to be able to like full on whatever it's bringing, I'm up for it.
That really feels like it gets at it.
Well, there's a lot of time that unfolds from when, one of those fruits falls off the tree and it's like rotting on the ground, and then it decays even more, and then it's like the whole body of the fruit dissolves, and then all that's left are the seeds. And then it's even a longer period of time when it's just freezing. Like there's like a long period of time before anything could even sprout. And that's one of the things that I connect to in what you're saying, Randine, is like in those moments where, you know, I can't find the trust, or a dimension of separation is sort of needing center stage. It's like I can remember that if I'm a fruit that's dying, I can remember somehow I became a fruit. Like somehow I got here. This is the maturation of something that started with a complete dissolution. And then it seems like there's that doer that lets go. It's like, oh, well, I guess I better die. And then all of a sudden that seed plops out and it's like, oh, look, there's a seed. There's a seed.
Guess I didn't die.
Or something died and then something came out, the next generation of becoming.
That that long time that it takes that you allude to, though, is only one face of it, because from the standpoint of time freedom, it takes nothing's happening. It takes no time at all. And there's this constancy, right? The constant from the Tao Te Ching, this constancy that is ultimately trustworthy, that just is trust, that is just shining through all the transition, and just this light emerging from emptiness, that this emptiness and this luminosity, which is a ever the same, but always new and ultimately trustworthy, shining through all of it while the matter comes and goes and the contracts are signed and broken, and all of that and all of that is happening. There's this light that doesn't really move.
And perhaps also the trust that place of sometimes, because of the enormity of the injury or whatever it is, to accept a place that is human and normal. That sometimes while we know better, we just cannot trust at that moment. That is completely part of the human condition, just like trust itself is of the earth and is the essence of who we are. Um, and that is why, like in the Sufi prayers or in Islam, right after the Fatiha, the equivalent to the Lord's Prayer, this 5 times a day, the most often recited surah is Al-Ikhlas, which is, may I recover my trust. May I, because life is so difficult. I know that this is so important, but I just can't do it. So we need to constantly remember that, but also constantly have mercy with ourselves and others if we temporarily can't find that place where we can trust completely.
Yeah. The whole human experience. Well, I think we've done it. Beautiful to see you all, and we look forward and to have everybody who's listening. We hope you enjoy this, and we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to comment. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.